The PlayStation had become a part of my summer break, and frankly, I was sick of it. High school was supposed to be about creating memories. That's when the idea of camping sparked. I joined a closed Facebook group, Let's Camp, which seemed like a good start. That's where I met Sam. Turned out he lived surprisingly close, right here in North Carolina. One afternoon, staring at the GTA loading screen, I messaged him, "Hey, ever been to the Appalachian Mountains? Thinking of a trip." He was online. "Sure, why not?" came the instant reply. When? 2 days later was the plan. Perfect. The Appalachians, famous, and yet a mystery to me. Mom and Dad had never taken me there when I was younger. Even so, it was just around 320 miles. Sam came in his compact car around 10 a.m., right at the bus stop near my place. Being a little cautious, I hadn't given him my exact address. It was about 3 hours of driving, with easy conversation with someone who shared the same excitement. Soon, we drove from the urban area into the hills, and then deeper into the proper mountains. We parked on the side of a quiet road. The air was different here, cleaner, sharper. We hiked for 2 hours. Finally, we found it. A perfect spot for camping. Moss-covered rock on one side, and a cluster of tall pine trees on the other. The view was breathtaking, layers of blue-green mountains fading into the distance. We set up our small tents and made a happy mess of the place. We were typical teenagers. We had fun, probably made a bit too much noise. I brought everything I could think of. Hat, marshmallows, a heavy-duty torch, even a small knife, to catch a rabbit for dinner, but no rabbits were spotted. Hours passed. A bonfire crackled, numerous stars glittered in the dark night, and the clear mountain air surrounded us. It was amazing. Then he appeared, an old man coming out from the trees. He smiled, a slow, unsettling curve in his lips. We were sitting on a couple of fallen logs, a decent distance from the tree line, a good 10-15 feet, but he closed that gap, walking straight towards our camp, as if he owned the place. He was completely bald and had loose skin, yet there was an undeniable strength in his build. His eyes were deeply unsettling, almost sinister grey. However, he was walking slowly. Sam, beside me, just watched, unblinking. My heart hammered. What was an old man in his 70s doing out here, this deep in the woods, at this time of night? How had he even found us? The man ignored Sam completely and stopped a few feet away from me. And then he started talking, like he was some kind of tour guide. "Good spot you boys picked," he said, his eyes scanning our messy setup. "But there's better." He then proceeded to tell me what to do, where to go in the woods. And the strange part, he gave all his directions in steps. "There's a waterfall, a pretty one, about 300 steps from here, off to your right. Good clear water. And if you go about 200 steps straight ahead, through those thicker trees, you'll find an old abandoned house. Not miles, not yards, but in numbers of steps. Who measures distance like this?" And his smile, it was just weird. All the while he was suggesting different locations. He kept scratching at the side of his pocket, repetitively. I was petrified, and I couldn't find my voice. Sam saw me, and finally he stood up slowly. He was a tall, well-built guy with a kind smile, but that smile was gone now. "Yeah, thanks," his voice firm but polite. "We know this area pretty well. Maybe we'll check those places out later, but not right now." "Oh really?" the old man smiled. "Okay, no problem." He turned back and walked into the woods. An hour or so, maybe around 9 p.m., he was back again. "Hello boys," he said, as if it was his first visit. "There's a small treehouse, 128 steps straight from here in the forest. Wanna check?" That smile was wider this time. He was still scratching that pocket. This time, we were both ready. "No thanks," I managed, my voice sounding shaky. "We're actually pretty tired and going to sleep now," Sam said. He nodded and melted back into the trees. The smile was gone now. Sleep was impossible. The whole night felt like a waking nightmare. We kept hearing the footsteps from the distance, and we kept sweeping the torch beam to the surrounding trees. He was hiding behind the trees. That horrifying smile was back. He was out there waiting for us to finally fall asleep. We saw him multiple times for seconds, but not clearly. With the sunrise, as soon as it was light enough to see properly, we didn't even discuss it. We threw our gear into our bags kicked dirt over the burning coals, and ran back the way we'd come. The 2-hour hike out felt like 10 minutes. We didn't speak until we were back in Sam's car. He dropped me right at my doorstep. A few days passed. My phone rang. It was Sam. "Dude, turn on the news." Channel number 8. I switched on the TV. It was him. The same bald head, the same unsettling features. Gary Hilton. A serial killer. He preys on hikers in national forests, and he executes the whole crime with a sharp knife which he carries in his pocket. Then the reporter mentioned his methods, how he'd lead victims to isolated places. The places he'd described to us, the waterfall, the abandoned house, the tree house. The news said those were the landmarks where he hid the bodies. My blood still ran cold thinking he must have been counting the steps to our camp too.
This past year, my wife and I had an unsettling experience. As soon as quarantine was lifted, we went for a hike at our local state park. Something we used to do regularly, even before we were married. I was personally looking forward to it. Our plan was to hike to a particular lake, spend the night, and hike back to the car the next day. It was a clear, warm day with nice and dry trails. For most of the morning, we were the only people out there. We decided to stop for lunch at a campsite about halfway to the lake, where we found another couple had the same idea. They were sitting at the concrete picnic table, and we asked if we could join them. Soon, all 4 of us were talking about what we had seen on the trail, and where we were headed. The couple revealed they were newlyweds on their honeymoon. My wife, a hopeless romantic, loved this and proceeded to tell them how we had met and other sentimental stories. 2 hours passed before we finally said our goodbyes. We arrived at the lake about an hour before dark, tired and hungry. I started a fire while my wife, Mandy, cooked a small meal as I pitched the tent. We sat around the fire, cooking s'mores, and eventually went to bed around 10 p.m. I woke up just before dawn the next morning to get the fire ready for breakfast. We repeated our roles from the night before, except this time I took the tent down and repacked it. After cooking, we made sure the fire was completely out and then started our return journey at 10 a.m. When we reached the halfway point, we chose not to stop. 2 hours later, we ran into the husband from the couple we had met the previous day. Strangely, his wife was not with him. Mandy asked about her, and the man explained that she had become ill the night before and had returned home. Before we could ask anything else, he added that his wife had insisted he finish the trip alone. It sounded strange, but we had no reason to doubt him. Just then, a group of people came walking up, and the husband excused himself to talk to them. I wasn't interested in prying further, as I felt their marriage was none of my business. I thought Mandy wanted to stay, but I reminded her of our obligations that night. She reluctantly agreed, and we continued on our way. We reached the parking lot not long after and packed up our things. There were a few groups of people talking amongst themselves, and as we were pulling out, several more cars, including a Ranger's truck, were pulling in. Again, I didn't think much of it. We made it home that afternoon and took care of some family matters. It wasn't until breakfast the next morning that we heard the news. I sat down with a cup of coffee and turned on the TV, just in time for a report about a dead female camper. When they showed her face, I almost choked on my coffee. It was the woman we had met just 2 days prior. I yelled for Mandy to join me in the living room to be sure of what I was seeing. Not having my glasses on, I pointed at the TV and asked her if that was one of the newlyweds from the park. She watched for a moment and let out a shocked gasp. A wedding photo of the couple then appeared on the screen, and Mandy grabbed the remote to turn up the volume. According to the husband, the couple had been at a popular cliffside lookout. Mandy and I had been there ourselves a few times. He claimed they had watched the sunrise, and as they were preparing to leave, his wife lost her footing and fell several hundred feet to the ground below. It was certainly possible, but something bothered me. I wondered why he hadn't mentioned this to us. More importantly, I questioned the story about her being ill, which he had told us only a few hours after the incident supposedly occurred. None of his behavior made any sense. I knew if something like that had happened to my wife, I would have been a mess. It all seemed fishy, and I was glad to see that Mandy agreed with me. It seemed her instincts had been right again, though I wouldn't tell her that. After a long discussion, we agreed to contact the law enforcement involved in the case. As it stood, the husband was not under any public suspicion. I contacted the sheriff's office and told them what we knew. The deputy put us on hold for a moment and then returned to say that someone might reach out to us in the future. It has been almost a year now, and no one has contacted us. This is what brings me to write to you. My instincts and my wife's tell us that a crime may have occurred. However, we have no proof or any real justification for our feelings. If law enforcement believed we had something important to offer, they surely would have contacted us by now, right? I don't want to be a nuisance or cause trouble for a grieving man who appears to be a decent person. I need some guidance. Should I keep pushing this, or should I leave the police to do their jobs? I just can't shake this nagging feeling that a man is getting away with cold-blooded murder. My friend from work, Samuel, called me during what was an otherwise quiet evening. His voice was full of excitement for the upcoming summer holiday, and he proposed we go on a hiking trip. He spoke as if it were the most wonderful idea in the world. A cold feeling immediately settled in my stomach. I cut him short, perhaps a bit too abruptly, and explained that I was not a fan of hiking. We spoke for a few moments more before I found an excuse to end the call. The reason I have this aversion isn't a simple dislike for walking in nature. It stems from a deeply traumatic experience in my past that I have never been able to forget. It all happened during the long summer vacation of my sophomore year in college. We were young, filled with the kind of reckless confidence that only youth can provide. At the beginning of that year, my best friends, Mike, Peter, and I, had made a pact. We pledged to seek out new experiences, to do things we had never done before, to push our boundaries. So when the idea of a hiking trip through Death Valley in Eastern California was suggested, it sounded like the perfect adventure. We saw the ominous name not as a warning, but as a thrilling challenge. Our preparations were laughably inadequate. None of us had ever been on a real hike before, but in our arrogance, we didn't think to do any research. We figured it would be like a slightly more rugged camping trip. We threw some snacks, a few bottles of water, and a paper map into our bags, convinced we were ready for anything. The three of us gathered with a sense of boundless optimism outside the college park, piling into Mike's old, slightly unreliable car. The initial hours of the drive were filled with laughter and loud music. With me navigating from the passenger seat, we pushed deeper into the wilderness. After a few hours, the map seemed to indicate that we had reached our destination, yet the scenery was a vast, empty expanse. There were no signs, no visitor center, nothing to confirm we were in the right place. We decided to drive just a little further, hoping to spot a landmark or another person. That was when the engine sputtered, coughed, and died. The silence that followed was deafening. We got out and popped the hood, staring at the complex machinery with no real understanding. We tinkered with it for over an hour, our frustration mounting with each failed attempt to start the car. Finally, we surrendered. With a shrug of false confidence, we decided to leave it and walk forward. It seemed like a simple choice at the time. We grabbed our bags and started our trek into the desert. We walked for what felt like an eternity, but was likely more than 2 hours. The sun was a relentless force, beating down on us, with an intensity I had never imagined possible. The air was so hot it felt like we were breathing in a furnace. My throat was painfully dry, so I pulled out my water bottle and drank deeply, finishing almost half of it in one go. We paused for a 20-minute rest under the pathetic shade of a small rock outcropping before pushing onward. It was then that we checked our phones, but there was no reception. My screen showed nothing but an empty signal bar. Mike's and Peter's were the same. A knot of genuine annoyance and fear began to tighten in my stomach. My frustration boiled over, and I shouted out, questioning whose brilliant idea it was to attempt this hike without a guide. Both Mike and I instinctively turned to look at Peter. He held his hands up defensively, his voice nervous as he insisted it had only been a suggestion, and that we were the ones who had taken it so seriously. A tense silence fell over our small group. I took a deep, shaky sigh and continued walking, my heart heavy with a growing sense of dread. The thirst soon became overwhelming again, and I drank the rest of my water, trying to save a few last sips that barely coated my tongue. Hours crawled by, but the landscape never changed. It was an endless panorama of sand and rock, offering no landmarks and no signs of life. We were wandering aimlessly, following instincts that were proving to be utterly useless. Suddenly, Mike stopped dead in his tracks. He crouched down, his head in his hands, declaring that he couldn't walk another step, and that this entire trip was a horrible mistake. I had to agree. I was exhausted too, so I suggested we stop to eat the cookies I brought, hoping the small amount of sugar would give us some energy. As we ate, Peter voiced the question that was on all of our minds. He wondered if we could just go back, admitting he had no idea if we were even heading in the right direction. A sliver of hope sparked within us at the thought of retreat. We all turned to look back the way we came, desperate to see our path. But there was nothing. The wind had completely erased our footprints, leaving only the pristine, unforgiving desert. The sight was more terrifying than the heat or the thirst. It was as if the desert had swallowed our past, leaving us utterly and completely lost. After finishing our meager food, we decided our only option was to wait for someone to find us. But as the hours passed, the emptiness remained unbroken. A strange, unnerving feeling began to creep in. Peter was the first to point it out, his finger aimed at the sun. He noted how the days seemed to be dragging on for far too long. He was right. By our estimation, we had been stranded for over 10 hours, yet the sun hung in the sky as if it were still high noon, refusing to set. It felt unnatural, as if time itself was broken. We checked our phones again, but the batteries had all died, leaving us cut off and without even the comfort of knowing the time. We knew waiting was a death sentence. We forced our protesting bodies to stand and began walking once more, into the vast unknown. My thirst was a physical pain now. I reached for my bottle out of habit, knowing it was empty. I asked Mike and Peter if they had any water left, but they shook their heads. The reality of our situation crashed down on me. We were dehydrated and lost in one of the hottest places on earth. My head began to spin, and my vision blurred at the edges. I could no longer feel my legs, and my body felt disconnected from my mind. I was losing consciousness just before the world went black. I saw a dark wall on the horizon, a massive dust storm rolling towards us like an angry wave. My first sensation upon waking was the sterile smell of antiseptic and the soft feeling of clean sheets. I was in a hospital emergency room. I looked around the quiet room, but I was alone. When an attendant came in, I asked him how I had arrived there. He explained that park rangers had found me alone, unconscious and almost completely buried in sand. According to their timeline, I had been unconscious for 2 full days. My voice cracked as I asked about Mike and Peter. The attendant's expression turned to one of confusion. He told me the rangers had found no one else. Later that evening, the rangers themselves came to my room. I told them everything. The car breaking down, the map. Getting lost, my friends who were with me. They listened patiently, but reiterated that I was the only person they found at the site. My pleas grew desperate, and I begged them to look again. Seeing my distress, they finally assured me they would conduct a wider search of the area. I spent the next week in that hospital bed, clinging to the hope that Mike and Peter would be found and brought to the room next door. On the day I was scheduled for discharge, the rangers returned one last time. Their faces were grim. They informed me that they had found nothing. There was no sign of Mike, no sign of Peter, and no trace of the car. They theorized that my friends had likely been buried completely during the severe sandstorm. To this very day, no sign of Mike or Peter has ever been found. They vanished into the desert. That experience left a scar on my soul, and now I avoid any kind of trip that takes me away from the safety of civilization. Hiking, camping, it doesn't matter. The fear is always there. This event took place about 12 years ago. Having heard many similar accounts, I decided it was time to share my own. I was around 12 years old when it happened, and the memory was so frightening that I had to ask my brother to help me recall the details. At the time, I was 12, and my brother was 26. He had been serving in the US Army for several years, and was preparing for his second deployment to the Middle East. It is important to note that he was a Green Beret, having recently completed the Army Special Forces qualification course to become an active duty SF engineer sergeant. He was not someone to be taken lightly. Since we both loved the outdoors, he decided to take me on a backpacking trip to the Sipsey Wilderness in northern Alabama before he left for 9 months. The trip was uneventful until our third night of camping. Around 8 p.m., we had set up our camp and were sitting by the fire, talking about things like guns and girls. Our campsite was positioned about 50 yards from a large stream and another 50 yards downhill from the main path, forming a rough triangle between the 3 points. It was summertime in Alabama, so the sun had not completely set. 2 men, who appeared to be in their late 20s, approached our camp. They asked if we had seen any hogs during our hike. This being rural Alabama, we had actually seen some deeper in the wilderness and told them so. Although they were polite enough for my brother to call them good old boys, I got a very creepy feeling from them. They had dirty clothes, greasy hair, and scraggly beards, looking like they belonged in the movie Deliverance. They lingered for a few minutes, longer than felt comfortable, looking around our camp. They asked us questions about how long we had been out there and how late we planned to stay up, which felt like they were sizing us up. Then they abruptly said goodbye and left. I felt uneasy about the encounter, even though I did not feel directly threatened, and I knew my brother certainly wasn't. About 3 or 4 hours later, my brother and I were asleep in our tent. I was woken by the sound of multiple dogs barking. I have always been a heavy sleeper, so for me to wake up, they must have been close. My heart began to pound. I kicked my brother through his sleeping bag and asked if he was awake and could hear them. He confirmed that he was, explaining that the dogs had been getting closer for the last hour. He told me I should lie still and be silent. As a 12-year-old, I was terrified. We could also hear occasional shouts from different directions, though they didn't seem to be getting any closer. After a few minutes, my brother whispered that they were probably just hunting hogs. This offered me a little relief, but not much, and I somehow managed to fall back asleep. My brother later told me that hunting at night was a major red flag, but he was likely just trying to keep me calm. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by my brother firmly squeezing my shoulder. He told me to wake up, put my shoes on, and follow him quickly and as quietly as possible. My heart immediately started racing again as I heard the dogs and voices in the distance. They were farther away than before, but still audible. I did as he said without question. Once we were out of the tent, he instructed me to get on his back, which was easy for him after his military training. We moved silently about 50 yards into the woods, toward the junction of the path and the stream, and hid in some bushes. Our hiding spot was on a small hill, giving us an elevated view of our campsite. As we lay there, I was aware of how loudly I was breathing compared to his complete silence. I then heard the distinct sound of a pistol slide being racked. Looking over, I saw my brother holding his HK-USPP pistol. I started to whisper something to him, but he placed his hand over my mouth and pointed towards our camp. The group of hunters had been steadily approaching and had now reached our site. There were 5 men and 3 or 4 dogs. They all looked young, but 2 of them were carrying rifles or shotguns. The dogs were going wild, having clearly picked up our scent. As any camper knows, a group of armed men with dogs showing up at a random campsite in the middle of the night does not have good intentions. I was scared out of my mind. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but my brother later confirmed they were talking about us, though he couldn't make out the specifics. They stayed for about 20 minutes, shining flashlights around and talking amongst themselves. My brother then leaned in and whispered a plan to me. He said that if they came towards us, I should turn and run as fast as I could. He instructed me not to stop or look back. He told me to stay off the trail and to look for flashing lights. He handed me a flashlight with a red filter, explaining later that it preserves night vision and is harder to see from a distance. At that moment, I was so scared I nearly cried, but I also felt a rush of adrenaline. I think I felt a sense of confidence that my brother trusted me to handle myself. We lay there for a little while longer until the men suddenly started screaming into the woods, asking where we were. They began firing their guns randomly into the trees. My brother dragged me back over the crest of the hill and threw himself on top of me for protection. Thankfully, our position kept us safe from any direct gunfire. After 5 or 6 more shots, the men started walking back the way they had come. They had only gotten about 100 yards away when a loud siren blared and emergency lights flashed through the woods. My brother had used our family's satellite phone to call the Forest Service. They had dispatched officers and game wardens to our location. Given the Sipsey Wilderness is 25,000 acres with mostly dirt roads, it had taken them a while to arrive. When we saw the game warden's truck, my brother signaled it with his light and pointed in the direction the hunters had gone. The truck sped off, its spotlight cutting through the trees. Once they were gone, we returned to our camp, quickly packed our things, and waited by the path. The game warden eventually returned and gave us a ride in the bed of his truck to the main staging area. On the drive back, my brother praised my bravery and said we could tell our parents what happened the next day if I wanted to. I asked him not to, afraid that they would never let me go camping again. We never received any definitive information about what happened to the men we encountered. Many friends have since visited the Sipsey area and had wonderful, uneventful trips. However, it remains a true wilderness area where law enforcement response, if you can even contact them, will be slow. I was lucky my brother was there and reacted so well. We were also lucky that whatever the men's intentions were, they either changed their minds or were interrupted. I do remember that after they left our campsite and the warden drove off, they'd headed in a different direction. They went parallel to the stream and away from the trail, where no vehicle could follow. The warden returned after about half an hour, saying other officers were on the lookout, but a thorough search would have required a large effort on foot. In the fall of 2019, my friends and I went on a 3-day camping trip in the desert. Our plan was to hike, explore, and do some shooting in a safe, remote area. There were 7 of us in total. 3 of us, myself and my 2 friends, who we'll call A and E, were emergency medical professionals. We established our camp near the road by an embankment that served as a good backstop for a shooting range. The first day and night passed without incident. I do recall, however, watching a truck with a large trailer drive by slowly as the sun set. This normally wouldn't have caught my attention, but the cargo, though covered, didn't resemble camping gear, and the truck's bed was empty. The 2 men inside the truck and I made eye contact as they passed. I offered a friendly smile and a wave, but they just stared back, motionless. After a moment, they both looked away and sped off, their trailer rumbling behind them. I didn't think much of it and continued with my night. Our second day was filled with more hiking and shooting. We stopped around dusk so the loud gunfire wouldn't disturb any other campers nearby. As night fell, we built a bonfire, opened some beers, and talked for a while. During our conversation, I noticed a faint reddish glow dip behind a nearby hill before vanishing. I asked the group if anyone else had seen it, but no one had. I dismissed it, thinking I had mistaken a fire ember for something else. About 10 minutes later, I saw the light again, this time higher in the sky and deeper in the desert. One of my friends identified it as a flare. I suggested that it might be an emergency flare. We agreed that if we saw another one, some of us would go investigate, since we had brought advanced medical supplies with us. Sure enough, a few minutes later, another flare appeared, a little to the west of the last one. A plan was quickly formed. A and E called another friend J, and I would take his truck to find whoever might need help. We were aware that cartels had previously used parts of this desert as hidden transport routes, so we brought some of our firearms for protection. We loaded our medical gear, got into the truck, and started driving, leaving the others behind to watch the camp. We headed toward the last flare, with the windows rolled down, listening for any calls for help. We also announced our presence, hoping anyone in distress would call out to us. As we continued, another flare shot up further west, casting a dim red light on the rocky hills. I pointed out the direction, and we found a small, dry ravine to use as a path. We drove down the dark ravine for some time, with only the truck's headlights cutting through the imposing blackness. We kept calling out, but heard nothing back. Another flare went up nearby, but still we could see no one. We drove until the ravine ended in a natural cul-de-sac, surrounded on three sides by rocky hills. We got out and searched the area with our flashlights, yelling out again, but there was no response. The place was empty, though we were certain this was where the flare had come from. After a thorough search, we decided to check another area back on the main road. The end of the ravine was a tight spot for the truck, but I managed to make a U-turn. Jay and I rode in the truck bed on the way out to get a better vantage point. As we turned, a cloud of dust and gravel hit me, accompanied by a loud hissing sound. I yelled out, wondering what had happened. I told him I thought he had blown a tire. We got out to inspect and found that his rear passenger side tire was flat. I noticed something strange about it. The tear was a clean cut on the sidewall, not jagged on the bottom as you'd expect from a sharp rock. I mentioned how suspicious this seemed, but my friends figured it must have just been a particularly sharp stone. While they worked on replacing the tire with the spare, I stood watch. The task was difficult. The tire iron bent, as did one of the lug nuts. As they struggled with it, I heard a sound approaching me quickly from the darkness. I instinctively turned, drew my pistol, and aimed my flashlight toward the noise. A large rock had rolled down one of the hills and stopped about 10 feet away from me. I scanned the top of the hill with my light, but saw nothing. Only a few small rocks and some gravel still tumbling down. I almost laughed at my overreaction, but then another large rock started rolling down toward me from the same area. Paranoia began to set in. Those rocks seemed too large to have been moved by any animal, and they had both come from the same spot. I told my friends what was happening, but they brushed it off, saying I was getting paranoid. I conceded it was possible, but I kept my guard up. My gut told me something was wrong, and I started to think the flares might be a trap. Despite the trouble, we were cracking jokes about our luck. I remarked that even though the situation was bad, he was glad to be in it with us, and we all felt the same. Just as they finished replacing the tire, another flare shot up into the sky near the entrance of the ravine and fell back to earth close by. We called out one last time as we loaded back into the truck, but were again met with silence. We drove back to the main trail, seeing no one. We started to doubt that anyone was in trouble and began to suspect it was just some kids illegally playing with a flare gun. Still, we weren't ready to give up. We started driving deeper into the desert when another flare was spotted. This one puzzled us. All the previous flares had been in roughly the same area, but this one was far to the northwest. I wondered aloud how they could have moved so far. E commented that if it was irresponsible teenagers, they needed to be told not to cause such a panic. We pressed on toward the last light, which led us to an even more confusing scene. We arrived at a dark campsite nestled between two hills. Our headlights revealed 2 tents, scattered belongings, and a fire pit. Something felt wrong. The camp looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry. The tents were unoccupied but still full of gear, and the fire had been stomped out, its coals just barely glowing. They had left everything behind: equipment, shoes, and packs. As I searched, I found something more unsettling. Recently fired 12-gauge shotgun shells. They were clean with no dust on them, and still smelled of gunpowder. I showed my friends, and they agreed this was very strange. We then found deep tire tracks, suggesting someone had left in a great hurry. That's when I saw it. an ominous orange glow coming from over the north hill that overlooked the campsite. I asked E to come with me to check it out. As we climbed the hill, we heard a low noise that grew steadily louder. When we reached the top, we looked down into a barren valley. About 50 yards away was a large circle of dark, hooded figures in robes. Their arms were stretched to their sides, and they were all vocalizing in a low chant. In the center of the circle was a wide ring of fire, and inside the flames, a massive black pyramid frame was visible. A short distance away, I saw the same truck and trailer from the day before, parked with other vehicles. I told her that I thought it was a cult. As the words left my mouth, the chanting stopped. The group of what must have been 50 people all turned toward us in silence. It was then I realized I had left my flashlight on. They all raised their arms once more and let out a horrifyingly loud wail. It started with one voice, then others joined in until the sound was overwhelming. I told in an anxious whisper that we had to get out of there immediately. We turned and ran down the hill. He yelled for A&J to start the truck. A&J looked at us with confused amusement, but I explained breathlessly that we had found a cult and that they knew we were there. Seeing the genuine fear on our faces, that ushered us into the truck, and we sped back toward our camp. As we got onto the main road, something happened that made A&J fully believe us and confirmed my suspicions about the flares. From every hill along the road, on all sides, flares shot up into the sky, illuminating the desert around us in what felt like either a warning or a threat. As we drove, more and more flares flew up, filling the sky until we were far enough away that they faded behind us. We made it back to our camp and explained everything to the others. They seemed as if they didn't fully believe our story, but they knew we wouldn't make something like that up. We spent the night speculating that the flares were either a lure or a warning system for the cult. We slept close together with our firearms nearby. The next morning, as we were cleaning up, I was clearing debris from our shooting range when I found something that hadn't been there before. A small wooden pyramid frame, charred black and still smoldering. I called everyone's attention to it, and we promptly packed up and left. We returned to our normal lives, but I think back to that event every now and then. I'm thankful that my friends and I were not harmed, and I hope the owners of that abandoned campsite managed to escape safely. I have no idea what that group was, or who those people were. I don't know if they were a legitimate cult or just people trying to prank campers. I'm fortunate I haven't had any other encounters like this, but I now know for certain that there are some strange people out in that desert.